Welcome to the Heal, Thrive, Dream podcast, where trauma survivors become healthy thrivers. Each month, we'll feature a theme in the trauma recovery and empowerment field. To promote your recovery, healing, and learning how to build dreams, here's your host, Karen Robinson, transformational coach and therapist.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Heal, Thrive, Dream podcast. Our next guest today is Dr. Amy Saltzman. I'm really bad with names, so I had to just take a check. Oh, she's giving a thumbs up. She is a former competitive gymnast. She is a physician, a mindfulness coach, an author. She's also a victim and a survivor of decades of emotional abuse. She has a knack for translating difficult topics into kid speak, so she works well with children. She's passionate about preventing abuse in sports, schools, music programs, religious settings, or any type of community activities. She offers individual support, group workshops on seeing, stopping, and healing from abuse. I am delighted to have you here, Dr. Saltzman. What did I not get in your bio that you'd like to state?
I think the only thing that you didn't get is that I say I'm a victim and survivor. And I do want to say that I think both of those words have power and a place in the conversation. And I think that anybody who's experienced abuse of any type needs to choose which terms they want to identify with.
Absolutely. Yeah. Okay. So I usually start, I'm all over the place, honestly. When I do these, I don't have a script, but I think it's sometimes helpful because my audience is survivors who are working towards thriving or thriving. They often identify when my guests come on, if they have any personal traumas, sharing what's comfortable with you, like things that are not newly shared, but anything that you've been sharing in your work that you think what will be helpful for people to hear.
Yeah, so I think a little bit tricky to encapsulate 31 years of covert emotional abuse into a little snippet, but I'll do my best. When I was 25, I was a competitive cyclist and in medical school, and a friend of mine invited me to attend a workshop with her coach, Georgina Lindsay, who she had said was helping her with her cycling. And I went and I found at least the beginning useful. And it wasn't, so that's the beginning. I'm going to fast forward through 31 years of subtle coercive abuse to the end, where in January of 2020, 31 years later, I asked to complete the relationship or to graduate or to reconfigure. And at the time that I asked, I really thought that there'd be like a celebration, an acknowledgement of how far we'd come. And I thought that we'd recreate something else. But when I asked to leave, she intensified her decades-long gaslighting of me. She said that I had Alzheimer's or some neurological condition, or that I was just resisting my spiritual growth because the coaching had morphed from cycling to kind of career and family to then spiritual growth. And when I kind of held my own and was pushing back, she insisted that I get a neuropsychological evaluation. That included 7 hours of testing for me, 2 hours of the neuropsychologist speaking to my coach, and an hour speaking to my husband. And in the end, the diagnosis was that the relationship was a relationship of undue influence. And in the moment that the neuropsychologist said that, it was like the light shifted or I shifted, but I saw the whole spider's web in full relief. And in that moment, it was a moment of absolute devastation, of realizing that this person who I'd loved and trusted with all my heart was not who I believed her to be. That maybe meant I was not who I believed I was. my whole spiritual edifice kind of came crashing down around me. And I've kind of taken the time now to look at each little building block and see, does this feel solid? Do I want it in my new structure? And my feeling is really most of the spiritual beliefs and teachings that I learned during my time with her that I could have learned without being abused by someone ethical are still solid. They were just misused. Mm-hmm. And then I also lost a relationship with a loved one. So that was a period of devastation. And out of that, I created my Spot a Spider program to teach kids, teens, and young adults about spotting and stopping abusive spiders, particularly grooming. And then also helping clubs or schools or organizations set up their environments so that they're less likely to have spiders in their environment.
Yeah. Can you tell us a little more about your spider program for people curious about what you have going?
Yeah, so the cornerstone of the Spot a Spider program is 2 videos. One is called How to Spot a Sneaky Spider, and that's all about how to spot grooming, which I think is the hardest type of abuse to spot. So one video is devoted just to that. And then the second video is how to spot an obvious spider, because again, you had mentioned I'm a gymnast and the abuse in sports is rampant and being covered in the media on almost a daily basis. In sports and in some other settings, even though we probably realize that a behavior is abusive, we tolerate it because it's going to produce an Olympian or a first chair violinist or a prima ballerina or whatever it is. And so as a society, we've kind of let coaches, teachers, whatever, get away with behavior that we wouldn't let, say, a classroom teacher do, or we wouldn't let a boss do. But somehow in these extracurricular activities for youth, we allow these behaviors to continue. So it's just helping people realize that 1, these behaviors are abusive, and then 2, what you need to do about them. And then, sorry, to say a few more notes about Spot a Spider. There are also a lot of resources there for organizations who want to hire a coach or a teacher or a ballet teacher or whatever on how do you decrease the likelihood of hiring a spider. There are codes of conduct, there are codes of ethics, there are anonymous participant surveys, and there are policies and procedures, again, to create an environment that is as spider-proof as possible.
So your whole program, the idea came after working with this abusive coach?
Yeah, I mean, the program was really born out of, like, again, in that instant when the neuropsychologist said, this is a relationship of undue influence, it really was like that moment where you're standing and you're facing one way and then you don't think anything's in front of you and then you see a whole spider's web. It was that kind of moment. And because I'm an athlete and particularly because I'm a gymnast, in my healing process, I started looking at how my abuse paralleled the grooming of the gymnast in the Nasser case. Mm-hmm. And then I realized, wow, there's nothing out there teaching kids to recognize these behaviors. There are several solid programs for parents, for coaches, but there wasn't anything out in the world that was directly speaking to kids of how do you know when something's off? When do you want to say, Mom, we watched that video with Dr. Amy, and today I went to the gym and my coach asked me to bend over so that he could put my ponytail up. And when I said no, he gave me a bad time. If we don't talk about these things, kids don't know what to report. And the main point for the kids is if it feels off, if it feels icky, if a coach is demanding that you do something that doesn't feel right to you, you need to be telling a trusted adult.
Yeah, I'm so happy that you created this. I think it's hard for adults to even notice grooming behavior, let alone children. And what you're saying about the listening to your intuition when it feels off, I think that's really solid advice.
Right. And I know for sure there were places where I ignored my intuition and where I was too trusting. And one of the NIXIUM survivors, Mark Vicente, has said, the reason that we don't notice the behaviors is because we're trusting and trustworthy, and we expect people to be the same. And I don't want to lose my trustingness, but I do want people to have just a smidge more of like healthy suspicion when they see certain behaviors.
Yeah, that's really well said. Yeah. Okay. And so where is your program located? Like, can people do the videos virtually? Is it in person?
Yeah, it's on the web. So it's www.spotaspider.com. And it's really made for someone to sit on the couch with their 7 or 8-year-old and watch it together. And there are discussion questions. And I know that this is a topic that people, parents, caregivers feel is complicated, and maybe they don't want to talk about it or they feel hesitant. And really the goal of the program is to make it as easy and straightforward, as accessible as possible. The second video does use anatomically correct terms. And the reason I use anatomically correct terms is because there's data to show that people who know and use anatomically correct terms are much less likely to be abused.
Yeah. I support that 1,000%. Yeah, my 19-year-old college student has been openly talking about her vagina since she was like 4 years old. So if something was wrong, I would know about it. She has no hesitation, shame, guilt about her body. It's been beautiful to watch.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. I felt more secure that she would tell me if something was happening. So yeah, that's such important work. The parent that's reluctant to try the program, what would maybe help nudge a parent? Maybe it's the parent that's naive themselves or already has explicit trust in all the coaching or religious education programs. What would nudge them?
The first thing I would say is that no matter how reluctant you feel about having this conversation or how awkward you feel about having this conversation, I promise if you need to have a conversation after an incident, you will feel 1,000 times more reluctant, awkward, and awful. So I understand that people may not be comfortable, but it's way better than having an after conversation. And we want to be trusting. And I don't want to give the impression that every coach or music teacher or theater director out there is a spider. We just want our kids to be educated so that they can recognize it. And the way I talk about it and think about it is when your child was going out in the world, you took them out and you showed them the stop signs and you showed them the stoplights and you told them to look both ways and you pointed out erratic drivers. And we all need to teach our kids to recognize erratic behavior in relationships. That's one piece. And then as a society, the only way the traffic rules work is because we have rules in place. So the other piece is we as a society, and particularly as parents, need to be lobbying for better rules for relationships of power. So you want to go into your gym and you want to say, what are your rules in sport? You can say, are your coaches safe sport trained? I don't think that safe sport's enough, but at least it's a minimum. You want to ask what are your hiring policies? How are you ensuring that you're not hiring potential abusers? And we want to be looking at creating structures as a society to minimize the risk of abuse, including rehabilitating people who have been abused, because people who have been abused are most likely to abuse others.
Yeah, they have found that abusers have been abused themselves. However, not everybody abused goes on to abuse.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. But if we were also detecting kids who were being abused when they were young, and we were able to support them and put them in healing environments, then when they grew up to be coaches, parents, teachers, whatever, then perhaps, like, there is, if we go far enough back, there's a way to break the cycle.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Now, how does your mindfulness coaching interplay with the work with the Spider program, or is it just something separate that you offer?
No, I think it really informed my whole approach to creating Spot a Spider. First of all, mindfulness, the way I define it, is paying attention here and now with kindness and curiosity so we can choose our behavior. So in the case of a potentially abusive situation, you want to be paying attention to those thoughts of like, something's off, and you don't want to dismiss that thought. You want to be paying attention to that clenched feeling in your stomach. And then, because I taught mindfulness to youth in all sorts of settings, public schools, private schools, affluent schools, underfunded schools, community settings, I really do have a knack for translating things into kid speak. And I think that was essential. And then the last thing is, even little things like in the video, I say at the beginning, even as you're going, I don't overtly use the word mindfulness because I wanted to kind of keep the topic separate. But I say, if it's too much at any point when you're watching the video, like, pause, stop, you can come back to it. You don't need to do it all at once. And there are 7 patterns for the sneaky spider. And after each pattern, there's a pause to, like, check in with yourself. Do you want to keep watching? Is this enough for now? Because the whole point of the videos is I'm teaching kids to listen to their own internal wisdom and to practice self-care. And so that's built into the video, and it's meant to let them also have their autonomy so that they can say, I don't want to watch right now. Because a lot of how we end up in abusive situations is we don't honor our own limits and boundaries, and we don't say, that's not okay with me. So even that's built into the video. It's kind of like there's practice built in for the kids.
Beautiful. So it also says in your bio that you're an author. What have you published?
So separate from the videos, I have 3 books on teaching mindfulness. So they all start with A Still Quiet Place. So if you look on Amazon or whatever and just start A Still Quiet Place and then put Saltzman in, they'll all come up. But the first one is a book for teachers and counselors and psychologists and people who want to teach mindfulness to youth. It's kind of walking them through a program. The second one is those same practices for teens. And the third one is A Still Quiet Place for athletes. And so it's applying mindfulness to achieving peak performance and finding flow in sports. And the bonus, because it's come up a lot lately, is the same skills that people use to achieve peak performance and find flow also have been scientifically proven to decrease stress, depression, anxiety. And so the kids are learning them in this particular setting for a particular purpose, but they have the side effect of making them more resilient.
Okay. So, Dr. Amy, another question I have is, how has your profession as a physician helped guide your work in the Spider program and being a mindfulness coach? Do you see connections?
Well, I think the first thing is that pretty much all of my professions are about preventing and relieving suffering.
Mm.
So that's the through line for everything. And I think the benefit of being a physician is simply being able to read, understand, and translate the scientific literature, and being able to, even if I don't, like, it's not necessarily in the Spot a Spider videos, but understanding like the neurology of what's going on, understanding the pathology of the spider and even why they behave that way. And for example, when I was first creating Spot a Spider, I did group reads to kids to kind of get their feedback. And one of the questions that came up is, why does the spider do this? And there's a very long, complicated explanation that kind of goes back to what we were saying about some hurt people. But to translate that into kid speak, what I said is, usually when the spider was young, they were a kid just like any other kid, and they wanted love, and they didn't get love from their parents or whoever. And after time, they gave up on wanting to be loved, and they decided that they wanted power instead. Now, there's a whole adult book by Dan Shaw that's gorgeous called something about traumatizing narcissist that goes into that in adult speak and walks through it, in a very clear psychological language. But, having the medical background and understanding that and then being able to translate it, I think is what is one of my gifts in terms of filling this gap in the world where I really couldn't find anything good or anything in kid language to start to address these topics.
I'm really glad I asked that question because it goes like we were talking earlier about credibility. It does help. People are going to love that you have knowledge of the body and the brain and how everything's interconnected in biology.
Well, and I also think there's a way that it helps people understand, right? I am a physician. I went to Stanford as an undergrad, and I was susceptible to covert emotional abuse because I think there's a misperception out there that people who get involved in abusive relationships, people who get involved in abusive groups, people who get involved in cults, I don't know, that they're weak or that they're stupid. And it's really often the complete opposite, because the abusers are kind of feeding off the goodness, the intelligence, the compassion of the victims. And so I also think, in sharing my story, it helps people realize that, abuse is common, and, kind of anyone can be in the wrong place at the wrong time.
Yeah, it doesn't discriminate. Yeah, right. I've worked with women who are high-level CEOs. They find themselves in domestic violence situations and they question their intelligence. I'm like, relationships and love have nothing to do
for people to know, right? Like, I look back on this now. This is why I love the analogy of the web, because I can see she wove this web like one shimmering, like imperceptible thread at a time. And looking back, I can see the whole thing. But in the moment, it was so subtle, so insidious. When I first went to the neuropsychologist, never in a million years this diagnosis was not a possibility in my mind. It never occurred to me. And if you'd asked me on the day that she delivered my diagnosis, I would have still said that the woman was trustworthy and, had my best interest in heart and was, spiritually advanced.
Wow.
So, that's, I think, part of the point I want to make is how subtle it is and how patient they are. And then all of a sudden you find yourself trapped.
Wow. What was her reaction to the report when it came out? Or
It's interesting and disappointing. I actually invited her to engage in some therapy and she declined. And she also tried to rope me back in one of her last texts. She said, "Oh, I have an opportunity for a book. Someone's interested in doing something with you in your book," because she thought that would be a hook for me. And, if I hadn't seen the whole web so clearly, it might have been. But unfortunately, she's behaved in pretty much true traumatizing narcissistic fashion and has, caused some damage in some relationship with a loved one and has shown no willingness to be accountable. And, her response just confirms the diagnosis.
Yeah.
Her behavior's textbook. So
exactly. Yeah. It's like if you didn't see it clearly before, she made it easier
Right.
to see. Yeah.
Right. And how she influenced various relationships, and it's classic.
Okay. So I think the program that you offer is very powerful. How are you getting it in the right hands?
Well, a lot of it is people like you having these conversations. And then probably one of the things I'm proudest of is, I don't know how sporty or not sporty you are, but in the last month and a half, the US women's soccer has had this huge abuse scandal that's similar to the gymnast, only slightly different because these women were professional soccer players and slightly older, but still abused, not just by one set of coaches and a team doctor, but by kind of the whole coaching system. And to their credit, the US Soccer Federation is the first sports federation in the world that I'm aware of that they had an independent report done. And they said, look, this is wrong. It shouldn't have happened. And we're going to do everything we can to make sure it doesn't happen again. And they're going to go above and beyond the recommendations of the independent report. And one of the ways they're going above and beyond the recommendations of the report is they've created a participant safety task force. And I've been appointed to the educational committee of that task force, which is truly awesome.
So awesome.
Right. And they have 3 million participants and 1 million coaches and volunteers. I don't know yet for sure if they're going to use Spot a Spider as is or just use my input, but hopefully that's at least a couple million people that are going to learn about coercive control before it happens to them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, my athletic abilities are meager. That's the word I want to use. I played high school sports, left pretty early to work to save for college and stuff. But
you don't need to be an athlete. That just happened. Like when you said, how am I getting the word out? That just happens to be the biggest or the largest reach right now.
Mm-hmm. One of my clients played professional volleyball and talked to me at length. We worked through an abusive coaching situation. And she was with this coach for 7 years, and it had quite a profound impact. A lot of healing to be done afterwards. So, yeah.
Yep.
And,
and again, these are people that we trust and trust to have our best interests in mind.
Tell me, what's the work been done so far in religious settings? Because a lot of podcast guests have had some religious trauma.
Yeah, the reason that I'm laughing, smiling is just mostly in sympathy. And because at some point I had my PR agent, I saw another religious abuse scandal in the Catholic Church. And I just wrote her, I said, maybe we could get the Pope to promote Spot a Spider. Like all the dynamics for sports, for religion, for Boy Scouts or Girl Scouts, for theater groups, they're all the same. And all the recommendations for Spot a Spider apply to any setting. So if someone here, one of your listeners, is committed to ending abuse in religious settings, everything on Spot a Spider could be utilized. You just need to, switch the word coach for priest and athlete for parishioner, but otherwise everything would be the same.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and to know it's across all religious organizations, and like you said, all kid related or sports related or music. It's every field and career.
It's not just kids, right? I'm sure you have listeners in abusive partnerships, in abusive work situations, entertainers. I mean, it's everywhere.
Yeah, we call it toxic work environments.
Yep.
Yeah. And grooming. I know I was a DOD employee for many, many years, and there's a lot
in
of
the military for sure.
Yeah, for sure. It was amazing how you don't see it. You can see it when it happens to somebody else so clearly, but when it happens to you, but
that gets back to what I was saying about the insidious and the one thread at a time, and how we give people the benefit of the doubt and we normalize behaviors that shouldn't be normal. All of those things happen.
Right. And I think it goes back to how important it is for teaching children and young adults and anyone the power of your voice and to speak up when something's not okay.
Yeah. And one of the things that I say in the Obvious Spider video is like, in the moment, because I also think it's a crazy expectation to think like that kids are going to say no or speak up in the moment, because they're mostly in freeze of fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. They're mostly in freeze. And so what I say in the Obvious Spider video is, if you feel brave and if you feel prepared and ready, then you can speak up. But I don't want you to feel bad if you don't, because it's normal for you to go into freeze. And then you need to tell someone after, because then people can also feel like, oh, I should have said something when that happened. But of course you didn't say something because you were in freeze.
And we're taught to respect adults, older adults.
Right. So I think if someone feels brave and they can pull it off and they can say, don't touch my butt or whatever, that's awesome. But if you happen not to say, don't touch my butt in the moment, then you can come home and say, mom or dad or auntie, someone touched my butt. And like, that's as good as it gets. Like, I think the other expectation's too high.
But yeah, great point. Okay. So the best way for people to reach you to get the videos is how?
Just www.spotaspider.com. The one other thing I wanted to add is that in addition to all the resources there's a fundraising program. So if you are a church or a Y or a sports club or a theater group and you want to have your families watch this, you can become an affiliate, and 20% of every purchase will come back to you. So better than a bake sale or a car wash or selling wrapping paper. You're protecting your athletes, you're raising money, you're reducing your liability. It's like a win-win-win. So, and if there are people who are listening who are in an underserved setting, they just need to hit me up and I will make sure they get them a video, either for their individual use or for their group if they're working in an underserved setting.
That's very kind. Thank you. All right, Dr. Amy, thank you for being a guest on our show today. Your program is more than needed. I probably couldn't stress that enough. So I'm really glad that you took something negative and turned it into a program where you could help others. So
Me
thank you.
too.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening in today. Please join us next week, same day and time. Also, I would love for you to check out my website, healthrivedream.com.